in their spirit of cooperation, as they said we will just bundle this up and get it done in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. The budget is, for the most part, or in large part, already written. But you'll have 2, 3, 4 weeks of pre-budget consultations. Given that situation, even if it were 6 weeks, what? The behavior of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, who feel that they are the CEOs of Canada, that behavior is really difficult for the members of Parliament. We don't want to create tension, but there is an issue here. As long as we don't know the minister's intention with respect to the timing of the budget process, we can't get further ahead in our work. The lack of transparency on the part of the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, the lack of dialogue. The parliamentary secretary is going to say, "Oh well, we spoke earlier on together, and everything will work." No, I haven't had contact for at least a month personally, and now they say, "Okay, the budget is going to be in March." The date was moved ahead. It's really of concern to me. If the November 4th budget, is it going to be for 6 months? Is it going to be for 25, 26, and 27? It's unclear. And it's very, very concerning to see this lack of stringency on the part of the government. We find ourselves in a position where we can't even make an agenda for our work. The budget in the spring that was supposed to occur, and now the November 4th budget that we are looking forward to, all of this seems very temporary. And now the parliamentary secretary is going to say, yes, we have the time. And if the opposition parties don't do what they're doing now, well, I worked for 10 months with the parliamentary secretary without advancing the issues at hand by an inch. So I'm saying all of this to say, Madam Chair, we need to have the time. We need to have an agenda that we can draft that would take into consideration pre-budgetary consultations before the budget implementation bill itself is going to be referred to us for study. They're going to say, okay, you're losing your time. Well, this is what people will say. You're being made a laughing stock as a committee when this is occurring. Maybe we'll be at clause by clause, or maybe we'll have the time to change a single comma if things are going well. But that is how the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance are treating Quebecers who've brought forward these 11 pages of requests to appear. We're not given the choice here. There's a lack of transparency or and give information diligence struck us. Diligence struck us at the last minute, and we've decided to suddenly become transparent. So we are asking for the minimum here. We are asking the government to take a modicum of responsibility, and this is why I say that my motion is a good one. It is a clear one. It is justified, and it would allow the committee to do the work as is set out in the standing orders. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Guérin.
Wanted to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to our colleague John Denis for bringing this forward. I agree with everything he's saying. The only thing I don't think I agree with him on is the reasoning why they didn't come out with a budget. I think that they were afraid of the massive deficit that would show. I think that's the reason why they were trying to hide the budget. And in fact, if I can remind the committee that they weren't going to come out with a budget at first after the election. They said no budget. And it was our leader that put on massive pressure with our Conservative team that forced them. First, he said it would be a half budget, and then through more pressure, they said they would come out with a full budget. And we already know through the Prime Minister's own words that he's going to spend even more than Justin Trudeau did, believe that or not. And that means more inflation, which we saw inflation go up. It's higher deficits, higher borrowing costs when taxpayers today will be paying more on the interest on this government's collected debt than what goes to health care to the provinces, unfortunately. And so we fully agree with this motion. I think it's a good motion. And I'll just leave it there at that, and we're looking forward to the vote right away.
Is there anyone else who'd like to debate this? Okay, Mr. Turnbull.
So, I mean, I think there's obviously a difference of opinion here. So I understand where the members opposite stand. I think obviously the budgetary cycle was interrupted by an election, which, you know, I mean, I get that you're giving me this face, but that's the truth. What we're proposing to do here is to have our committee hear from witnesses. That's what we propose to do, right, is to hear from witnesses who have submitted. We have 940 submissions to this committee. Obviously, no committee in the Finance Committee in past has heard from every single person that submitted a brief. But in past years, and I was a part of this committee in the last budget that passed, we did hear from witnesses right up until clause-by-clause analysis. So, I mean, I think what you're saying here is you want to hear from witnesses and give people a chance to input into a budget process, but then at the same time, you're essentially proposing not to study and get the consultation process underway. I don't understand how that makes any sense from a transparency perspective when we know that the federal budget is coming November 4th. I remember opposition parties ranting and raving in the House of Commons wanting a budget as soon as possible. The government, I think, in due course and with, I think, you know, spent time to work on consultations across the country, take a lot of input, 83,000 submissions for survey, you know, over 50 different consultations, every province and territory, every industry, including tariff impacted. And I get that this committee should hear from many witnesses, and we have 940 of them. I've taken meetings just this week with great suggestions from groups for suggestions for the Budget Implementation Act. I mean, why can't we make use of this committee's time right now by getting into pre-budget consultation work and hear from those witnesses? I think their testimony is valuable and our time is valuable. So I see this as throwing a bit of a wrench into the work to what slow us down so that we can't hear from somehow we hear from them now. Well, so what we're going to hear from those is in the last budget that got through Parliament, where the Bloc members on the committee and the Conservative members made the argument that we needed enough time to hear from enough witnesses right before we got into clause by clause. So I was here for that. I mean, I'm not making this up in my head. And so we had quite a number of meetings and heard from a number of witnesses, and their testimony was very useful. And I think was really valued by all committee members. So I'm struggling here to understand what the path forward might be. It sounds like, Mr. Jean Denis Mr. Garon is more interested in just hearing from the minister. I thought you wanted to hear from stakeholders. Why wouldn't you want to hear from stakeholders from Quebec, from all across Canada as part of this pre-budget process? I mean, we have the time. Let's use it wisely here this fall, leading up to the November 4th budget. And the claim that somehow the budget is pre-baked completely is just not, it's patently false. It's false. There is certainly work going on internal to the Department of Finance and the Minnow team to prepare the budget, but by no means is it completely prepared in advance. I think we can all agree that there's considerable amount of work to do yet on the budget. There's still decisions that need to be made, and there's still time to hear from witnesses in this committee and have their input incorporated into the eventual formulation of the budget that gets released on November 4th. So I really feel like this is setting us back. And we could be moving forward on that valuable testimony. And I really think there's a lot of stakeholders that would love to come. And I've been getting lots and lots of requests for people to come to this committee. Maybe we should just sit late and hear, from more witnesses, and use our time over the next few weeks to hear from as many of them as possible. I would be up for that. That's the hard work that I'm into, and I want to make sure we get this budget right for Canadians. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Letta?
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say that I'm particularly surprised at the position that our colleague, the member from Mirabel, has taken. And in fact, I'm somewhat confused about it. We'll wait until March 26th, shall we? But I'll come back to what Mr. Holland said rather than speak about what Mr. Garon told us. It would seem that there is some thought that this could be a trick or something to be hidden. Well, no. We know that the budget will be brought down on November the 4th. I don't have any insider information, but everybody knows the date. We're not hiding anything at all. We've approached things perhaps differently, but the bottom line is going to be very clearly indicated. There's nothing to be hidden here. Nothing is being hidden. And with respect to the claim that by my colleague that from the Conservative Party, and indeed this is a line that has been constantly repeated in the House since we've come back, inflation is out of control. Prices have gone up. Yesterday, Statistics Canada published that it was 1.9%, the rate of inflation in August. And the Bank of Canada has a target of between 1% and 3%. So we're there, 1.9%. So where does this come from, this notion that inflation is a huge problem? Is there confusion between inflation, like our colleague from Mirabel has indicated, perhaps the speed with which prices increase and the level of prices? After 3 years that we've gone through in the pandemic, but this year in 2025 there was new growth. And that was indicated very clearly by the Bank of Canada. Indeed, today, the Bank of Canada dropped the rate by a quarter point, by 0.25. So all of this is a real surprise to me to hear this stress and insistence on inflation being out of control. No, it's not the case at all. Now, payments on the interest of the debt. Our colleague referred to the terrible situation about interest payments on the debt that will go up, but interest rates remain under control in Canada, as was mentioned by the Prime Minister in the House today. Interest rates are lower than in the United States. And there is confidence in Canada's ability to manage its economy. In fact, we are amongst the best in the world in terms of servicing the debt. And servicing the debt here today in Canada, in terms of percentage of GDP, is much better than the other countries in the OECD. I think that we're, if memory serves me well, we're in third position with respect to interest payments. Well, in 1990, there was a real problem in terms of debt management. At that time, the payment on the public debt was 6 to 7% of the GDP. That was enormous. That was enormous. That was a big problem, but we're not there right now. And my colleague and his fellow Conservatives like to talk about a terrible crisis, but somebody a lot wiser than myself said that everything that is exaggerated ends up being insignificant. And I think there's a lot of exaggeration going on there. With respect to what was said by the member for Mirabel, I have to say I was surprised. I'd like to have a bit more clarity. So what does he see in the future? We're going to have a budget on November the 4th. People have taken the time to send briefs, to express their views. The parliamentary secretary, the Minister of Finance, and myself and others have met with all kinds of groups in Quebec and elsewhere. So we'd really like to be able to continue the process, to have the time in the month and a half that remains. In any case, I'm just taken aback by what was said by the member opposite, referring to the 2025 budget and trying to determine the 26 budget. Maybe it will be in February, maybe March, or maybe in April. It's very clear the budget, to my mind, would not be necessarily reiterated so closely in 26. But this is what I think. One of the elements in this situation is extraordinary set of circumstances. connected, but it is because of it's government. It is our neighbors to the south who initiated this assault on world trade. That creates enormous uncertainty. That it would be the responsible thing to do would be to take the maximum amount of time to draft a good budget, a responsible budget, and that, to my mind, is important. But it would be irresponsible to do otherwise if we don't have information. We have information now in a difficult situation. We have to deal with an unpredictable neighbor, but in any case, someone who wants to bring all trade and all industry back to the United States. But we must invest massively in our economy to be able to operate and to reduce this dependence that we have on the Americans. So now the budget will be in November. In the budget, there are some measures that have already been announced that will represent it, but they will be presented in a financial framework in good form. Well, you ask what will happen in 26 for a budget. Well, we haven't brought in the 25 budget yet, 2025 budget, and my colleague from Mirabel referred to that. We really cannot go ahead in that way. Thank you, sir.
6:30, I'm going to adjourn this meeting now until the next sitting. Thank you.